Here you go.
Yeah.
Boiled linseed oil. Lindsey, tell us about this stuff. Do I need to fear it? Do I
Yeah.
need to be respectful of linseed oil?
Yeah, you should be frightened of linseed oil. Kate has asked me to give a impromptu monologue on the dangers or potential dangers of linseed oil, specifically boiled linseed oil. Um, this is partially because in the alphorn community, there have been some people that are recommending linseed oil as a good way to oil your horns. And when you're oiling the inside of an alphorn, you tend to spill a lot of oil everywhere. So you got to be careful with what you're going to do as far as cleanup goes. So yeah, generally speaking, raw linseed oil is going to be a better idea than boiled linseed oil. If it's called boiled linseed oil, you don't necessarily know what it is. Sometimes boiled linseed oil will contain accelerators and stabilizers. It won't actually be pure linseed oil, so that it cures faster and it cures harder. Raw linseed oil, specifically food grade raw linseed oil, is going to be pure seed oil, which is always a good idea.
And that says inedible.
Yeah,
I noticed.
specifically says inedible because we don't know what's in it, and it doesn't say. It just says it's from the Jasco Chemical Corporation. But it's probably just linseed oil, but can't say for sure. It might contain, like I said, some sort of an accelerator or some sort of a hardener in it. Who knows? But yeah, so generally speaking, raw linseed oil is pretty safe, although I still wouldn't recommend that you dispose of the oily rags at the end of the process carelessly, because that's the problem. Linseed oil is not it doesn't just dry, it cures, and it's an exothermic reaction when it cures, meaning it releases heat. It oxidizes. So if you mop up a spill of boiled linseed oil with a cloth, and it doesn't really matter what it is. It's going to be worse if it's a cellulose-based cloth like a paper towel or a cotton t-shirt rag or something. But it doesn't really matter what you mop it up with. You're going to massively increase the amount of surface area that the oil has available, and it's going to cure faster because it has more exposure to the air. And if you then crumple that up and toss it, it can spontaneously combust. I would even go so far as to say it's reasonably likely that it'll spontaneously combust. It's not even like it's unlikely to happen. So yeah, generally speaking, personally, I would just recommend you don't use it because it's just not worth the risk. If you're going to use it, then there's all sorts of recommendations out there. People say you should take the rags that you've used and put them in a container that's completely filled with water so that there's no access to the air. Sometimes, even if you put them in like a container that's half full of water and you throw a whole bunch of rags in there, eventually they will actually float on the surface and they won't even get wet, and then they can still spontaneously combust. My wife and I do use linseed oil on a regular basis. We just throw the rags in the fireplace and then light them on fire, and then they're already burned, so they can't spontaneously combust. So that's how we deal with the situation.
So raw or boiled, it's still...
Yeah, it's still a problem.
Concerning.
Yeah, raw linseed oil is naturally going to cure a lot slower. So it's not going to release as much heat as it cures, but it still could spontaneously combust. It's kind of obnoxious, really, because there's a lot of scaremongering out there of people saying, just generally flat, don't store oily rags in a bin. And I get why they do it, because oily rags, quote, oily rags can spontaneously combust, but it's sort of like, what kind of oily rags are we talking about, right? If you soak a t-shirt in olive oil and throw it in a bin, it's probably not gonna burn. Or if you soak a t-shirt in engine oil, it's probably not gonna spontaneously combust because those don't cure, right? If you paint, peanut oil or even walnut oil onto a surface that is food grade walnut oil, not walnut oil that you can buy from the hardware store, which once again contains accelerators and stuff, so it actually does harden up. But if you paint a lot of food grade oils, or just oils that don't cure naturally, lard, coconut oil, butter, if you paint those onto a surface, they're never going to harden, right? So they're not releasing heat as they harden because they're not hardening, right? Linseed oil, on the other hand, is actually a finish. It will actually harden up, right? It's like paint. So yeah, it's a kind of a different beast. And, as a result of people saying just flat, don't store oily rags in a container, people just kind of end up dismissing it because they're like, it doesn't do anything. There's no danger here. But there is with linseed oil. So really, it's mostly linseed oil specifically that's the dangerous one. It's not the only oil that can spontaneously combust, but boiled linseed oil specifically is the most dangerous.
Why do you like to use it?
Why?
Why do you?
Oh, just because it's a nice finish. It's if you actually use food grade linseed oil, even if it is boiled linseed oil just is linseed oil that has been heated and kept at an elevated temperature for a while, which causes it to pre-polymerize, so then it cures faster when it's exposed to air. But like I say, oftentimes the term boiled linseed oil is used for blends of things, so it might not necessarily be pure linseed oil. But it's a nice natural finish, so that's why I want to use it. You know, there's no weird stuff in it, so you know it's nice if you want a finish that doesn't contain any strange chemicals that you don't know what they are. It's also nice because it soaks in, right? It soaks into the surface of the wood and doesn't just form a film on the outside, so it will keep the wood more moisturized. In our area, being that we're in Nevada and the high mountains, it's so dry around here, wood tends to crack and warp quite badly, and if you can actually get the oil to penetrate fully in, then it'll help keep the wood preserved a little bit longer. But we don't use boiled linseed oil to oil our alphorns. We use walnut oil because walnut oil cures a lot slower. And the whole point of oiling the inside of the horn is to soak the oil into the wood, so you do not want to use a quick drying oil. You don't want to use something like tung oil. You don't want to use something like boiled linseed oil. Raw linseed oil works just fine, but it's too thick, so it leaves a coating and it takes forever for it to drain off. You want to use something a little thinner.
Is it rather sticky also?
Yeah, exactly, right? It'll leave the inside of the horn really sticky for a really long time, which is why we use walnut oil, because it just runs off a lot faster, and you can sort of run a swab down there if you want to mop up the excess. And we still throw the rags when we use walnut oil into the fireplace and burn them, because why would you run the risk?
Yeah. Note to self, because I don't know that I would have next time I oil.
Yep. It's just, it's just a good idea not to, why would you risk it? Because, linseed oil is dangerous and can spontaneously combust.
Do you oil your carbon fiber horns?
No. You could if you wanted to. The epoxy that we use with our carbon fiber horns is really stable. It certainly doesn't oxidize over time, and it also doesn't get UV damaged, but that is not true of most carbon fiber, and it's not true of most fiberglass either. So if you have a polymer horn of some kind, or indeed anything that's made of some kind of a polymer, it can get sun damage and it can oxidize, and it might not be a bad idea to use something like an oil on those, just to make sure that the surface doesn't become porous. So yeah, so it's not necessarily a terrible idea to think about doing something like that, but since our carbon fiber horns are new, and the resin that we use is not going to oxidize and get porous, it's not really a problem for us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.